Christy, how rare is a prosecution like this?
Thank you for having me. A prosecution like this is really unprecedented. A federal civil rights prosecution charging officers for not intervening with a superior.
And why is that the case? I mean, why aren't there more prosecutions? Is it because it's so rare it doesn't happen, or that they're so difficult, or that you just don't have video that shows it like you did in the tragic case of George Floyd?
I think all of those things, alongside the fact that people's expectations for policing are changing. So there are very few federal prosecutions of officers for failing to intervene at all, even though every circuit has this requirement. Every federal court in the nation has this requirement, and it's been a requirement since 1972. But it's especially unusual to charge officers for not intervening when it was a superior, whether formal or informal, that was violating the person's rights.
So the video's appalling. We've all seen it so many times. What happened to George Floyd was a crime, literally a crime. I mean, Chauvin is now in jail. Is it nonetheless realistic to think that someone 3 or 4 days on the job would be willing to intervene in the case of their superior officer doing what transpired in this case? Does that provide them a defense?
I think it is definitely something the jury will be thinking about, but legally it's absolutely not a defense. And in the Eighth Circuit in particular, the circuit that covers Minnesota, they have specifically said that the fact that the person who's violating the individual's rights is your supervisor, in that case it was the sheriff, they said there that the deputy sheriff still had a responsibility to intervene to prevent the violation. And I think if you think about it, we can't have policing unless we ask officers to stand up, or require that they stand up and intervene when they see another officer violating somebody's rights. But that also means we need to support them and ensure that they have they're fully equipped to be able to do that.
So what specifically should have transpired? What would the training tell them to do in your view?
Yeah, it's a really important point. There's a duty to intervene in Minnesota, as I've said, not only under federal court law, but under state law and under department policy. But what they didn't do, in my view, is really fully train officers and then support that with accountability and incentives to create a culture of active bystandership. So, the program that I run at Georgetown Law, ABLE, that's one of the things that we try to do. So, for example, we teach officers that you have to you may have to ratchet up your intervention here. And that's, I think, what we saw with Lane in this case, former Officer Lane. We saw him, what you might call probe, ask, should we turn George Floyd on his side? We train officers that in ABLE that you might have to ratchet that up. We use an acronym, PACT, probe, alert, challenge, take action. And I think officers need to be trained. And I'm not saying the legal standard here. This is just a tool that you can teach officers so that interventions are more effective. To first probe, but if that doesn't work, you have to alert. And if that doesn't work, you may have to challenge. And finally, you may have to take action, including physical action.
But if someone 3 or 4 days on the job goes up and leans into Derek Chauvin in this case and says, hey, Chief, I don't see him responding, or hey, Chief, maybe we should roll him over, and doesn't get the response they're looking for, would you go so far as to say then they've got an obligation to yank Derek Chauvin off George Floyd's neck?
Eventually, yes. The next step would be alert. Hey, if you don't move him, if you don't take your knee off his neck, he could get hurt. Then challenge, you need to take your knee off his neck. And if that doesn't work, absolutely take action, physically remove the knee from the neck. And we've seen this in other industries. The hospital industry has trained nurses to speak up to doctors when they're about to operate on the wrong patient. The airline industry has done this. Colleges have done this, training students in all those informal hierarchical situations to speak up. The law requires it, and we should require that officers step up even when it's a hierarchical situation. There's lots of hierarchical situations in this world. Policing is definitely one of them, but we have to demand that officers understand that. And to be fair, when you do this training, and we do this in ABLE, you teach officers to expect that this is going to happen with a superior and how to respond to that.